I don't know if we're starting yet. I'm Kaylin's call.
Yeah, it's Kaylin's call.
Let's see, what time is it? It's 2. Let's just go ahead and get started. Might as well.
Good, man.
So I am Justin Davidson. I am the president-elect of the Nashville chapter for SMPS, and I actually have to get on another call, but I wanted to hop on here and introduce Matt. And I wanted to do that because I actually work with him, and he's one of my favorite people in this industry. I don't even know what to say about this guy. He is originally from Nashville, but he lives in Atlanta now, and he's made our jobs a lot easier at Dunn because we do not have to worry about presentation strategy and coaching people and all that stuff anymore 9 times out of 10 on interviews, because he worries about it, and he's really, really great at it. And he has a really diverse background. He started out trying to fly airplanes, and I don't know.
I did fly them. It was the landing part that I was not so great at.
Then he went to work at Gresham Smith and ended up being in charge of their marketing. And then went to work for a coaching company. And then we were lucky enough to get him to come over to Dunn and do the same thing internally for us. Been trying to get him up here to do an event for about 3 years, but he won't do it. So this is the best we're going to do.
Yeah, I avoid Nashville.
And I'd also like to thank you, Matt, for not wearing a green polo shirt today. First time in about a year that I've seen Matt in any fashion where he's not wearing a green polo shirt. So thanks for that.
Just to clarify, I have 4 different ones, different shades. It's not the same shirt every time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, thank you for not doing this from the toilet like you made for us the other day. So
I'm not even going to explain that one. I'm going to leave that for you to explain later.
No, the background of that is he did a little best practices video for us internally, and he mocked up a lot of do not present here, do not present this way, et cetera, et cetera. It was pretty funny. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to him, and I've got to hop off of here. I'm sure you're not going to say anything I haven't already heard.
I doubt it. I really doubt it. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you jumping on.
All right, buddy. Good luck.
Thanks
for coming.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I'm going to dive in. Before I do, just one more time, if you want to turn your video on, please go ahead. It actually makes my job a lot easier when I've got some faces to look at. So thank you for everybody, Kathleen, Chris, all you guys that have your videos on. The rest of you, don't hesitate. Like I said earlier, I will not be judging you. Donna will be judging you, but I will not. So you don't have to worry about that. You won't be? Okay. She says she won't. We'll see. Anyways, this is like a homecoming. Kaylin sent me the attendee list, and I went through it, and I'm like, holy crap, like I know half the people on that list. And I want to thank you guys so much for spending some time out of your day with me. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the interest in what SMPS has asked me to talk about. So I'm going to dive in. I've definitely got some content to cover. I've got some tips and tricks and all that kind of good stuff. But I want this to really be driven by you guys as much as possible. So don't hesitate to unmute and jump in with a question. Feel free to use the chat box. I'll be monitoring that as we go. But I really want you guys to drive this as much as possible. So don't hesitate to jump in, interrupt, whatever you need to do. All right? And Evie's there, so I know I don't have to say that twice, right? Right. All right. This is a weird time. This is a weird time, especially to be a public speaking coach. And I think the biggest reason for that is because there's no public. We're all isolated. We're all siloed. But yet communication doesn't stop, right? I mean, humans always have, we always will find ways to communicate, to connect with one another. So this is really no different than the way it's ever been. It's just a new venue or a new channel for a lot of us. But that need to connect, that need to communicate is still there. And so what I want to talk about today is just take some best practices that honestly I've learned over my career, and then some new things that I've learned over the last month or so. Every single time I work with a team to do one of these virtual interviews, we learn something new, and I try to pass that along to the next team. So I've compiled a pretty good list of stuff that hopefully can give you guys some help and edge in your next shortlist interview. But I want to start with the basics because I asked Kaylin to title this thing Death, Taxes, and Good Communication Fundamentals, because those are three things that never go away. They never change. They're consistent no matter what, right? We're always going to die. We're always going to pay taxes, and the basic fundamentals of communication never change. So I want to start and just kind of touch on what some of those are as a refresher for most of you, maybe new material for some of you. Let's talk through the messaging piece. We'll do that. And then we'll touch on delivery, the things that matter as far as delivering that message and the differences or the nuances that come into play when you're doing it virtually versus in person. And then we'll touch on Q&A. Q&A is kind of that impromptu piece that's not scripted, not necessarily prepared, but crucially important, especially in a shortlist interview. The other thing too is if any of you guys are not actively involved in shortlist interviews, everything I'm going to talk about, you can relate it to project meetings, you can relate it to internal meetings, you can relate it to webinars like this. This is universal. This is not just purely applicable to shortlist interviews. That's just the world I live in most of the time. And so that's where my references usually come from. So any questions before we dive in? We'll start talking about some messaging stuff, but anybody have anything to get off their chest or questions to knock out before we start? No. Hi, Laura LaGiacono and Angie Womack and Jessica Lucision. Wow, these are some very familiar names. All right, let's dive in. Let's talk about message. I'm going to ask you guys, somebody's going to have to speak up or chat. What is the point of public speaking, whether it's a shortlist interview, whether it's a conference presentation, a virtual presentation, in-person team meeting? Why do we do this thing? Why do we do public speaking or verbal communication? What's the goal? I'm going to lean on Chris Wyman. Chris, talk to me. What's the point of all this stuff?
Well, to connect with other people.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If you guys didn't hear Chris, it's to connect. That's actually a really simple and really perfect answer, but a lot of times we overthink that, right? A lot of times we think that the point of verbal communication is to somehow transmit as much information as we possibly can from our heads to the heads of the people we're talking to. It's almost like we can do that Vulcan mind meld, right? If you guys remember Mr. Spock from Star Trek, like he had this way of basically connecting his brain with the brains of whoever he was talking to, and he could just download a huge dump of information into their heads. And a lot of people approach public speaking the same way, with that as the goal, that somehow we can take all the knowledge, all the information that we have, and somehow in a short period of time, whether it's 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, transmit that into the heads of the people we're talking to. And here's the challenge with that. It's not possible. It's just not possible. It's not possible. It's not the goal. It's not effective. I want you to think about verbal communication a lot like a bridge, right? So I'm from Nashville, like Justin said, and I know there's several spots around Nashville over the Harpeth and wherever, where there's those smaller bridges and they have the weight limit signs when you get to the bridge. So you come up to a bridge and it may say weight limit 10 tons, right? Well, what happens a lot of times, and this happens all across the country dozens of times a year, is typically like a trucker will come up to a bridge like that. They'll see that 10-ton weight limit sign. They know they're driving a 20-ton rig. They just go anyways. I don't know what the thinking there is. Maybe if I drive real fast, I can somehow get across the bridge, but the fundamentals of physics don't change either, and a lot of times that ends in catastrophe. But verbal communication is a lot like one of those bridges with the weight limit. There's only so much you can get across verbally before the bridge collapses. And you guys have all seen the bridge collapse. You've all experienced that. Anybody want to pipe in with kind of what happens in the room or over the video when the bridge collapses? What does that look like?
People fall asleep.
Yeah, people fall asleep. You can
I think when people start looking at their phones.
Yeah, definitely. The phones come out, people fall asleep, their attention is, just distracted. They start making the grocery list. And what's happened there, it's, a lot of times we think they're being rude or, this or that. Oh my God, Chris, is that your daughter? She is so big now. But what's happening there is not that they're being rude. It's not that they don't care. It's that they're honestly overwhelmed. They're just not taking in the information that you're pouring on them. So what you have to do, the trick to this is to identify those things that matter most to your audience. What are those 2, 3, 4 things that matter the most to the people you're talking to? Not things I care about, not my concerns, not my worries, not my, not features of me, not all my great qualifications or experience, but what matters to you, the audience? I'm going to identify no more than 3 or 4 things that matter to you, and I'm going to focus my entire message on those 3 or 4 things, right? Now, one of the pushbacks I often get is, especially in the competitive kind of shortlist interview world, is, well, but we want to tell them about ourselves. Okay, but do they care? I think if we're being honest with ourselves, clients, trade partners, design, build partners, whatever, do they really care about you? Do they really care about how many years your firm has been around? Do they really care about how many offices you have? Do they really care how much, full service you offer in-house? The reality is those things they don't differentiate us, right? Justin mentioned I started at Gresham. Gresham's a 55-year-old company now. Well, that's great, but for every 55-year-old company, there's a 60-year-old company, right? For every company that's got 20 office locations, somebody's got 25 office locations. For every company that's built 4 of these things, there's another company that's built 6 of these things. So those features about ourselves that we love to share do not differentiate us typically from our competitors. That's number 1. And then number 2, like I said, nobody cares. Nobody cares how much you've designed or built. Nobody cares how many employees you have. Nobody cares how many years you've been around. I know that's a harsh reality to face, especially in the marketing or business development world, but it's absolutely true. The only reason I, as an audience or a potential client or owner, care about you and your stuff, your features, is in the context of how that translates into a benefit to me, okay? So let me say that again. The only reason I, as an audience member, client, and owner, whatever, care about your stuff, your features, the things that you bring to the table, is in the context of how those things provide a benefit to me. So I go back to the whole idea of keeping your message focused around things that matter to your client. If your client is particularly concerned about budget, you should talk about budget. You should talk about how you're going to help them stay in budget. You're going to talk about how you're going to manage the budget, talk about how you manage change orders, talk about how you manage, whatever, in order to help maintain their budget. Now, I'm not saying never talk about yourself, but if you're going to talk about yourself or your firm or your team, you want to do it in a way that ties back to the benefit to the client, right? So maybe I've got this really cool, I'm on the construction side, obviously, so maybe I've got this really cool estimating software, and we can do all this real-time virtual estimating. And that's great, but the problem is everybody's got that now. Every national GC has got real-time, live, continuous estimating now. So that thing in and of itself doesn't set me apart. But if I understand that the client, what they really need is help making decisions early on. A lot of times they get kind of groupthink, or they get locked in and they just have a hard time coming to those decisions. The benefit to them of me having that cool pre-con estimating software is that I can help them make those decisions quicker, which is going to help them finalize that budget faster, which is going to help their project be more successful, okay? And I may talk about the tool, the software. I may talk about the experience on another project where I help another client do the same thing. So I will incorporate things about myself, about my team, about my tools, my processes, but only in the context of why they matter, why they be a benefit to this client. Does that make sense? And so I think this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. These slide decks that start with, let's see, here's how most of them go. Slide 1 is going to be our mission, vision, and value statement. Slide 2 is going to be a brief history of the firm in 1 to 6 paragraphs. Slide 3 is going to be an org chart with lots of little thumbnail pics of all our people. Slide 4 is going to be a map of the United States, and when you click, little stars will pop up wherever we have offices. Slide 7 will take that same map, and now there's going to be little building icons show up wherever we've designed projects in those areas. Slide 8 is probably going to be, you get what I'm saying, right? You don't need that. Don't worry about that. Don't spend time qualifying yourself. If you weren't qualified, if that client didn't think that you were qualified to design or build or do their thing, you would not have been invited to the dance, I promise you. Clients are not in the business of wasting their time interviewing teams or having conversation with teams that they don't think are qualified. You're qualified. You know that. They know that. The question that's being answered, just like Chris said a little bit ago, is not who's the most qualified designer or builder to do my job. That's a subjective thing to begin with. The question that's being answered is, who do I want to spend the next 6 months, year, 2 years of my life with? Who do I want to get out of bed every day and know I'm going to go have to face on site? Who do I want to, who am I going to look forward to having meetings with on a weekly or sometimes daily basis for the next several months? That's the question that's being answered. And so by focusing your message simply on the 2, 3, 4 things that matter most to your client, talking about the solutions you'll bring, and only talking about yourself in terms of how those features of you translate to benefits for the client, you can help to make the conversation about them and start to make that connection a little more real. So let me stop there real quick just to see if there's any questions at all about content. Got some chats. Let's see if I can do this without shutting this thing down. Let's see. Okay, you guys were responding to my question earlier. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna start with a simple message. We're gonna talk about the few things, the 3 or 4 things that matter most to that client. We're gonna talk about our plan to solve them, how we're gonna approach it, the tools, the processes, the plan, the whatever to solve that problem for them. And then we'll use ourselves, examples, stories, project examples, whatever, as kind of the proof in that. So again, I'm talking about myself, but only in the context of why it's gonna matter to that client. I always tell people to keep their message limited to no more than, let's call it 3 key points. There's a little bit of flexibility with that, but in general, I want my teams to aim for no more than 3 key points. Why is that? Why is that? Let's say you got an hour to present. It's a highly complex job. I'm working on a project right now over in another state. It's for a major university. It's a complete upgrade to their entire university-wide electrical distribution system. 3 points. Why? Y'all feel free to use the chat.
They'll retain.
That's all they're going to remember, right, Kathleen? I mean, I've got an hour. Let's say I got an hour to present to these guys. And let's say I go in there and I've got 20 points. How many of those are they going to recall?
3 to 4, but you're also probably not the only team they're interviewing.
Yeah, 3 to 4 if I'm lucky. I don't know how many they'll retain. I know they won't retain 20. I know that the more stuff I throw at them, the less of it that they'll retain, right? And so a lot of times we fall into this trap of throwing as much spaghetti at the wall as we can. You know, come up with all the things that client might care about, all the things that we want to talk about, and then we just kind of address it all and hope that something sticks. That's no bueno. You can do that as part of your prep, but ultimately you got to boil that up to what are the 2, 3, 4 things that really matter the most? What are the things that are going to make the biggest difference to this client? And then focus on those things. There is the problem with retention, like Kathleen just said. There's a problem with time. Again, maybe I have 30 minutes. This university electrical system pursuit I was telling you about, 20-minute interview. They got 20 minutes. We're talking about, you know, $100 million worth of switch gears and assemblies and cabling and, you know, potential to shut down an entire state university if anything goes wrong. 20 minutes to explain to them how we're gonna do that, right? So I don't have time to talk about everything that matters. So there's a retention issue, there's a time issue. There's also one other thing. There's another thing that really happens when I can take something complex, whether it's a university electrical distribution system, whether it's the design of a new building or landscape or whatever. There's something about when I can take a complex challenge like that and really boil it down to the 2 or 3 or 4 things that matter most. What happens there? What happens in your mind when I can do that? What does it say about me? Let's see, Valerie, what does it say about me? When I can take something and boil it down to just its core, simple essence, what does that tell you about me?
It says that you know what you're talking about.
That's it, dude. That's exactly it. It says I know my stuff. And it's funny, just before this call, I just got off the phone with that team from the university. And one of the challenges there was these guys are really smart. Like, these are like electrical engineers, and like they understand kilowatts and voltage and stuff that I don't even have any idea what they're talking about. But the problem is, the deeper they went into technical explanation of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, the more they lost me. And then I lost all sense that they were the experts that they truly are. But when I got them to take a step back and talk through some of that stuff very simply, very concisely, focus their message around 1 or 2 points, and then just really focus on driving those points home using examples, analogies, stories, suddenly it all made sense to me. And once it made sense to me, my thought about them was, God, these guys are really, they know their stuff. And this comes from Einstein. Einstein said, if you can't explain something simply, it means you don't understand it well enough. And that's absolutely true. And it's one of the traps we fall into in this industry, because we are really smart. We are very technically astute. We know our stuff. We have our own nomenclature and kind of our own language that we use. And to the uninitiated, to people, our clients, or people kind of outside of our world, that can be very overwhelming. And they don't gain a sense that we know as much as we know if they can't understand it. So being able to boil it down to the core, simple, basic message focus on 2, 3, 4 things that matter most, and then use stories, examples, analogies to drive that home. Let's hit on the stories piece real quick. I keep bringing that up. I want to spend a little bit of time making sure we're clear on why that's so important. So we're going to focus our message on the things that matter most to the client. We're going to explain it in a way that's simple so that they can understand it. And then we're going to use stories, examples, project examples, that kind of thing to really drive that home. What's so important about that stuff? What's so crucial about the stories, the analogies, the case studies? Let's see. Donna, you're chomping.
Hey, Matt,
hey.
we haven't met yet. I'm Jennifer.
Hey, how are you?
So I'm great. How are you?
Doing good.
Good. So what's so important about story is it ignites the right side of the brain, and that's where change takes place. So if you give someone a file folder in which to put your information, explaining your identity, their identity, and that connection, then they'll have a file folder in which to keep that information in the right brain, and change can take place.
Spot on. You obviously understand this much better than I do. I refer to it simply as retention, right? My idea is if I can get you to draw a picture in your head of what it is I'm talking about, you're going to retain that. You're going to stick that in that file folder you referred to. Because what happens there is I'm giving you something tangible. I'm giving you something visual and tangible. And you're going to get that in your head and you're going to relate it to something else you already know. And so you're going to draw an image, you're going to play a movie, whatever in your brain, and it's going to help it stick. If I just dump data on you, if I just give you a bunch of technical specs and numbers and graphs and charts and all that, there's nothing for that to stick to.
Right.
Data isn't sticky in and of itself. So I've got to give you something to make it stick or help you retain it. That's certainly one, Jennifer. I agree completely. Retention of stories, examples, narratives, analogies is huge. There's a couple other benefits to it. How about Brittany? Brittany Early?
Hey, yeah.
Not to throw you under the bus, but go.
When you use stories and examples, it shows that you actually understand the concepts that you're presenting, that you're not just giving a word and don't really know how to implement it in real life. So I think they believe that you can truly provide that type of solution for them.
Yeah, it's the proof, right? I can tell you my thoughts, I can tell you my theory, I can tell you my approach, but you're not going to know for another 6 months, a year, 5 years, whether or not that actually works. So by telling a story, I kind of show you, look, I've already done this before. Other clients, other owners have experienced this and they achieve success as a result. And it kind of drives home, like Brittany said, that this is real. This isn't just an idea. So it's relevant.
Matt, you had mentioned earlier about people spending time, the next couple of months or years, with these people. It's also an opportunity to inject your personality.
Absolutely.
So get to know you better.
All day long. I can't connect with your data, right? Your data doesn't do anything for me. Your technical explanation, your process-driven explanation, even just your deck of slides, those don't connect me to you in any way. They don't create any kind of emotional connection. But a story does. Valerie's exactly right. A story where I can kind of take you along a journey with me. I can help you to visualize something. I can give you some insight into my personality or my personal experience. That creates an emotional connection that all the data in the world can't do. So back to Chris's point, why do we do this to begin with? It's about that connection. Valerie says stories help you make that connection. One other thing, this is probably the most obvious one. Why would I spend more time on stories, analogies, case studies than I would on just data dumps? Catherine, look like you want to jump in. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it just makes it interesting to listen to.
That's it, dude. It's just more fun. How many of you watched C-SPAN last night? Like nobody, right? Who watches The Bachelor? Who watches what's that love one on Netflix? Love at First Sight. Who watches movies, whatever. We watch those things because they're more interesting. I mean, C-SPAN's full of data. I'm sure you could get on C-SPAN and learn a lot of cool stuff, but who cares? It's boring. Nobody wants to spend their time doing that. We want to spend our time listening and hearing stories. And so it's the same thing. If I had the choice between spending an hour on a call with somebody to listen to them ramble through all their data and results and charts and graphs and all that versus spend an hour on the phone with somebody who just kind of revels me with like great stories that are interesting and relevant and maybe even a little bit funny or their personality comes out, I'm going to choose that guy every time. Every time. That's how I would rather spend my hour. The one thing, just in my years of coaching, and obviously I've worked a lot in the AEC industry, but I've also spent a lot of time outside the industry. But one of the things I think that is the biggest hurdle to overcome as far as telling stories is our professional folks, our technical folks, they don't always recognize what we mean by story. So I'm not talking about a generic, one time we had a client and, they were really struggling with their budget. So we got in there and worked real hard and got them on budget and they were real happy. Like, that's great, but that's not a story. What was your point? Where'd you go? Oh, I lost her, Jennifer. Jennifer's point about retaining it kind of on the right side of the brain. In order for that to happen, I've got to give you detail. It's the detail that makes that story sticky, right? So I can tell you about this generic client that had this generic problem and we've provided a generic solution. That's all fine and good. Or I can talk to you about XYZ Corporation over there in Hendersonville. And those guys were new and, just really starting to grow, and they needed a space that could accommodate their current needs, but they knew that over the next year, they were going to see growth 50 to 100%. And so they needed the flexibility for that future growth. And so what we did is we went in and we sat down with them and we identified their current needs, we identified their future needs, and we kind of allowed those lists to, the cream to rise to the top of what all could we accomplish to help them be successful now, and also set them up for success in the future. And so by the end of that project, what we had done is built out 20,000 square feet of interior space, but left them an additional 20,000 feet of shell space. So their budget was able to be maximized on the current stuff. But when it is time for them to grow and add more staff and add more capacity, it's going to be a lot less cost because the space is already there, ready to go. It just needs infill, right? Those are two very different kinds of stories. One's a narrative, and a narrative has detail, people, places, names, colors, whatever. Those are the details that make it stick. The other is just kind of generic, and it doesn't really have the impact that we want a story to have. So that's the biggest challenge. What about you guys? What challenges do you have? I don't think it's probably new to anybody on this call that stories are important, but what challenges do you have as far as telling stories or getting your teams to tell stories, or what do you run into? How about Lynn? Lynn, what challenges do you have when it comes to getting people, either yourself or other people, to tell stories? Lynn, music. There you go.
Oh, engineers love data.
They do.
So just pulling out that story from getting out of that factual basis and getting that the relevance of the story is what's the challenge with a lot of engineers.
Agreed. Anybody that's kind of highly technical. My trick with that, Lynn, is I'll let them kind of tell me their data, right? And then without them knowing, I kind of secretly force them to tell me a story. I'll just start asking them questions and I'll probe and I'll basically get them to take me through, oh, really? You achieved, 15.7% energy savings. That's awesome. What was the name of the company? And they'll tell me the name of the company. And I'll say, where are those guys at? And they'll tell me where they're located. And I'll say, why did they hire you in the first place? Like, what were they trying to do? And then they'll tell me about that. And then I'll ask, like, when you were on site, like, was there anybody that just gave you a really hard time? Was there anybody on the client side that you either didn't get along with or you got along with famously, or they had lots of challenges? They'll tell me about that. Before you know it, Lynn, you've kind of forced them to tell a story. And once it's out there, you can kind of help them craft it and refine it. But yeah, the tendency is to just talk about our data, but the data doesn't stick. Let's see, somebody says marketing doesn't get to participate in the interview. We coach, lead, get the horses to drink water. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Even as a coach, I get asked a lot of times to step in and do the interviews, and I won't do it because I am not the guy that's going to design or build anything. God help us all if I did. So my job is to kind of coach and guide, which is your job as well. One of the best ways to do that is to help people see themselves the same way other people see them. And so this gets more into kind of some of the delivery stuff, but it helps as far as content and stories as well. But use video, man. Use an iPad, use an iPhone, use your computer, record them, right? And then let them watch it and ask them, what would you do different? What's working, what's not? Were you bored by that 10-minute soliloquy about, transformer and gear assemblies? Were you captivated by that story? How was your energy? How was your eye contact? I let people coach themselves because there's only so much they're going to do or listen to me as far as trying to get them to do something different. But once they see themselves the same way that their audiences see them, there's no going back. It's like once you have that awareness, you can't unsee it. And people will tend to make the biggest changes for the better once they've kind of seen themselves. So that was a great comment. And that's how I approach that. Any other questions or comments about message, content, focusing your message on a few key points? Alan, anything from you? You doing okay?
How do you turn the faucet off? Matt, how do you stop talking?
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
I haven't figured it out for myself yet, Valerie, but I'll tell you how I coach other people to do it. I use an approach, a structure called plan story. Okay. And what I ask folks to do is think about, don't think about your message. Don't think about your content. Just what's the point you want to make, right? So I had a guy on this team I was referring to. Actually, let me grab this paper. And I asked him, I said, what's the point you're trying to get across? And the point he was trying to get across was how important quality control is to the overhaul of an electrical distribution system. Okay, that's your point. That's what you want me to take away. Great. Now, what's your plan for doing that? What's your plan for quality control for this client's electrical distribution system at a high level, right? And so he was able to talk me through, number one, they do these manufacturing quality checks where they go to the factory, they observe the manufacturing process, they test some sample products at the end of the line to make sure everything is as it should be. And then number two, there's another quality control check at the install phase where they actually look at the assemblies, check those, make sure that the material is as it should be, there's no cracks, there's nothing missing. And then finally, there's a startup and testing quality control check where they actually have a certified testing contractor there on site doing the testing and the quality check as they're starting up the system. So I know nothing about electrical distribution systems, nothing at all. But by getting him to boil it down to, here's my point, quality control is crucial. Here's my plan, 3-phase check process, manufacturing, install, and startup. And then stop there. I don't need much more explanation than that. All I need now is for you to make it real. Tell me a story. Tell me about a client that you worked with where you went through that process. Tell me a time that you were going through that process and you identified a major problem or a defect or something, and you were able to prevent it from impacting the job. And so he did. He took that and he started talking about when he had worked at Merck Pharmaceuticals and did a huge electrical system upgrade for those guys. And he was telling me about that they had gone and done the manufacturing checks, quality checks, and everything seemed fine. And then when they got on site, the material got on site and they started doing the install, they noticed that the ceramic insulators on the, what do you call this? The injectors, I think they're called, but they were cracked. And this is a big deal because if a piece of ceramic in those things is cracked, it could cause an arc in electricity, basically melt the entire system, right? They didn't find that at the manufacturing stage, so the guess is that may have happened in shipping, in between. But thankfully, they did that install phase check and before they went to startup, and so it didn't create an arc. There wasn't any problem. They were able to replace those ceramic components and get the system up and running as it should be, right? That's all I need, Valerie, to really drive that home. I don't need a long technical explanation. I don't need to get into it tons and tons of detail about how and when and why. I can just lay it out simply for you. 3-phase quality check process, and then give you a story to drive home why that's the perfect approach to make this happen. Does that work for you? Bye, Don.
Matt, how do you avoid rambling? And we're getting into a lot of Zoom short list interview, and you want to get your points across, but we had one where we're limited to 20 minutes and another one where we're limited to 30. And you want to get your points, you want to avoid rambling, but how do you do that without it come across as reading? That's
where the practice comes in. And I never, ever, ever let teams read. That's the cardinal sin of presenting, virtual presenting, public communication, public speaking. What I want them to do, again, is just to go back and identify what are the points I need to make. I need to make the point that quality control is crucial to an electrical system upgrade. I need to make the point that that there has to be central leadership that drives collaboration in order for a campus-wide upgrade to be successful. They need to make the point that there has to be creativity in how they package the various bid packages so that they can get maximum subcontractor participation, right? That's the point I'm making. And then just explain that point. Give me a couple sentences, 2, 3, 4 sentences. It doesn't need to be scripted. And what I tell my guys is you don't need to script it because this is what you do. If you're an electrical engineer, you don't need to write down a script of how you go about doing quality checks on an electrical system. You know this. It's what you do every day. If I stopped you on the street corner and said, hey, Alan, how do you ensure quality on an electrical system? You could talk to me about that for days, right? So I just want them to stay confident that they're not going to say the wrong thing. They're not going to mess it up. It's their world. They're the expert. They're not going to say the wrong thing. But the practice as a team is what helps to limit that time, right? I'll give you 5 minutes to talk about it. Say whatever you want to say. Have your story, your example, whatever queued up and ready to go. But then when that 5 minutes is up, that's all you get. If they run long, we do it again. Have them condense it. But it's really the practice, having that structure, first of all, to follow, and then practicing condensing it is what makes the difference. Some other tricks, just I'll jump over to that since we're on the topic. A lot of these virtual interviews are shorter, I've noticed. Usually, hour and a half sometimes in person. I'm seeing a lot of the virtual ones at 20, 30 minutes. Quite honestly, nobody wants to sit on a video conference much longer than that. I don't blame them. So one of the things I have my teams do is never to prepare for more than about half the time they're given in terms of formal content or prepared content. So if you've got a 20-minute presentation slot, and the client has said, we'll let you go for 20 minutes and then maybe 5 minutes of Q&A. I want to take that 25 minutes and just cut it in half. And I want to prepare content for no more than about 12 or 13 minutes. And then I want the rest of that time to be dedicated to Q&A, not just at the end, but incorporated throughout the whole 25 minutes. And a lot of the reason for that is because the tendency is you give me 20 minutes to present. I'm going to pack that 20 minutes full of as much stuff as I can. And we've already talked about why that doesn't work, right? So instead, it's kind of the less is more idea. I'm gonna hit the highlights. I'm gonna talk about the things that matter to you. I'm gonna kind of plant the seed, but I want you to jump in and ask questions. I want you to jump in and tell me what matters to you, and then we'll talk about that. So just not having the whole thing, not having your 20 minutes or whatever packed from start to finish. I would aim for no more than 12 to 15. Any other questions? Good stuff. And some stuff coming in on the chat. Any other questions about messaging? Limiting your speakers to the time you've got. All right, let's switch gears then. Let's talk.
Right, Matt, I do have a quick question.
Yeah, jump in. Yeah.
What is the recommendation when you're doing the virtual interview? Do you put the whole team up there? Do you need to limit the people who are speaking? How do you coordinate that, the number and then who's speaking when?
So that's where the practice and I call it choreography comes into play, right? I have some rule of thumbs for in-person interviews. One being that I don't want more people from my team in the room than will be on the owner's side. So if the owner's only gonna have 5 people in the room, I'm not gonna bring more than 5 people. If the owner's gonna have 20 people, I may bring a few more. But I'm only gonna bring people that have a part. Are there to add value. They've got something to say. They've got something pertinent. I don't want creepers. I don't want people in the room just standing silently off to the side, because honestly, that's just weird. And you ask clients about it and they'll always be like, yeah, they were great, but who was that weird guy standing over there that never said anything? So on the video calls, you can kind of get away with that a little bit more, Kathleen, because obviously if somebody's not talking, they're typically kind of, in the background, and that's fine. But there's still a choreography that has to take place among the 3, 4, 5, 6 people that are speaking. And so the fewer number of people, the easier that choreography gets. As far as how it gets choreographed, the transitions, who says what, and then hands off to whoever else, that's where the practice comes in. Usually when I'm doing in-person prep with teams, I'll do a full day, 2 full days of prep. What I've found on the video conference though is I can't hold people's attention more than about an hour and a half. So I may do 3 or 4 hour-and-a-half long prep sessions over the course of a week, versus trying to do an 8-hour-long prep session all in one day. And that tends to make a big difference. Good stuff. What else? Let's hit on some delivery things. I know this is a challenge, and you guys kind of get put in the coaching chair when it comes to delivery. I'll say it again, the fundamentals of good communication don't change. When I teach public speaking skills or communication skills, from a delivery standpoint, I focus on 2 things. I focus on eye contact. I focus on vocal energy. It's the 80-20 rule. You guys are familiar with the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. Bonus points for anybody that can tell me who came up with the Pareto principle.
Pareto.
That's right, Brittany. Excellent. It was Mr. Pareto. Very good. Bonus points to Brittany. Yeah, it's the 80-20 rule. It says, you know, that the 20% of the input creates 80% of the outcome, or 20% of the effort yields 80% of the results. There's 1,000 things you can do to be a better public speaker. There's 1,000 things you can do to be better at virtual interviews or in-person interviews or whatever. But the reality is, if you just make great eye contact and you have great vocal energy, that's 80% of it. And everything else is kind of a toss at that point. So when it comes to eye contact, what I teach in person is that eye contact, you should treat it like you're having a mini one-on-one conversation with each person in the audience, right? So if I'm live, if I've got you guys in a room, I'm going to look at Kaylin and I'm going to talk to Kaylin just for a few seconds. I'm going to make a point. I'm going to finish a sentence, but it's just going to be me and her in the room, total focus on her, my body energy, my eye contact. I'm talking to Kaylin for that brief 3 to 5 seconds. And then when I'm done, I'll switch my focus to Leah. And then it's Leah and me just having a little mini one-on-one conversation, helping her feel connected just for that moment, getting my point across 3 to 5 seconds, and then I'll move on to Chris or somebody else. The reason for that obviously is connection. If I'm in a room full of people and I'm constantly kind of grazing the room with my eyes, I'm trying to look at everybody, I'm trying to talk to everybody, but as a result, I'm really talking to nobody, right? So by kind of dialing that down, picking one person, having a brief 3 to 5 second mini conversation, mini one-on-one conversation with that person, and then switching gears and having a conversation with somebody else, not only does that individual feel connected, but the other people in the room feel that sense of connection as well. It may not be with them, but they get that I'm engaged. They get that I'm talking to you, not at you, right? And so that's huge. The difference online or virtually, the biggest difference is where your eye contact goes. So if I'm looking at my monitor and I'm looking at, let's say, Kathleen, right? If my eyes are on Kathleen on my monitor, Kathleen sees me as looking down. She perceives me as looking towards my keyboard. So my eye contact online has to be with the camera lens at the top of my laptop, which is weird. It's exactly the opposite of what we do in person, right? But I've got to actually talk to that camera lens so that you guys get a sense of eye contact. That's a challenge for a lot of people. One thing I do, and if I could take a picture, I'd show you. I had my daughter draw 2 little eyeballs, colored eyeballs, and I've got them taped on either side of my camera. So when I'm doing a webinar, I'm doing an interview, whatever, that's kind of my cue that's where my eye contact, eye contact needs to go, is with the camera lens and not the monitor. Questions about eye contact, especially in the virtual world? You guys good? All right. As far as the setup, Justin mentioned earlier, I did kind of a little best practices thing for internal use, but I'll share a lot of that with you guys. As far as the setup, y'all probably know this, but just to cover some basics, lighting. I want good lighting. I want a well-lit room. I don't want a lot of backlighting. Creates kind of a silhouette effect. I want the monitor, or the camera to be straight on with me. I want to frame it kind of like my headshot. I always refer to the triangle between your shoulders and the top of your head. If this area is visible, that's what you need. I don't want to be way back here. I start seeming small and diminutive. I don't want to be way up here because that's just freaking creepy. You want to just frame yourself right in the center. And the reason for that is I want to try to recreate that one-on-one in-person experience as much as possible. And this is kind of the frame of reference you would get if I was in the room with you. So this is what I try to recreate. The background just needs to be uncluttered, professional. Everybody here is doing a good job with that. Be wary of, not you guys, but your teams. A lot of times guys will be in their workshop or their home office, and there's always something back there that they don't notice, but you or a client will definitely notice. So I just try to get them to be in an uncluttered space as much as possible. Books, pictures, whatever. I just don't want a lot of junk. What else as far as delivery?
Matt, what do you think about the background filters?
Oh, I'm gonna give you this is a hard no on those background filters. Mm-hmm. They pixelate so badly, and you absolutely. In fact, I just had to kind of get onto this team. They had a business developer that was insisting they use these backgrounds, and what I explained to her was, I'm just watching floating heads. These aren't even people at this point, because it does that whole like cutout thing, but it's not perfect. And so if I move this way, my shoulder disappears. Or if I move this way, suddenly my hair poofs up. It's way too distracting. I would avoid those at all costs. They're cool, don't get me wrong, they're fun. I love putting myself like on the Star Wars ship, for my team meetings, but as far as a client interview, way too distracting.
That's what I was thinking, but
Yeah.
May not be popular, I thought.
It's distracting, and then honestly, Valerie, it just doesn't look legit. It doesn't look authentic, right? Who of us presents standing in front of a huge logo of our firm? That's not a personal connection. That's not authentic, right? So yeah, just make it real. Unless you're Jim Enzio, and then you can kind of put yourself on the lake. That's beautiful. I love that. Any other questions about kind of the framing, the background, eye contact?
Well, so Matt, you're standing up here, and you're a little more dynamic back and forth. Than talk about that. Talk about getting people to maybe try that.
Perfect segue. That's exactly where I was going, Chris. Appreciate you, buddy. That gets to the energy side, right? And so eye contact is crucial. Vocal energy is crucial. It is really easy to slip into couch, pajamas, and slippers mode when you're at home on your couch wearing pajamas and slippers. And the vocal energy comes down, and suddenly what I'm conveying is less energetic, less passionate, less intense. So what I teach folks to do, what I suggest they do, is they stand up when they do these interviews. If you could see my setup, you would laugh. I've got a 2-drawer file cabinet, 2 storage bins, a small document safe, and then my laptop on top of it. But I'm 6'2". That's what I've got to do to get that camera straight on with me when I stand up. But you guys don't know that. You would never see this ridiculous setup I have, so it doesn't matter. The point is, though, when I'm standing and I'm talking to you the same way I would as if I was in the room with you, I can tap into the same energy. I can give you as close to the same experience online as you would have if we were standing or sitting in a room together over at the Science Center or wherever. So I don't say it's mandatory. I let it be up to each individual team member, but the ones that really struggle with energy, I tell them to stand up. Just get up and get rid of the constraints. Another thing about energy, and this is the same whether it's in person or on video, a lot of people don't realize that they've slipped into presentation mode. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people, they'll be this great personality, outgoing, extroverted, the kind of person you love spending time with, hanging out with after work, whatever. But the second they go into presentation mode, they get watered down. Their voice goes into kind of a monotone. Their energy comes way down. They seem bored. They seem disconnected. They may seem like they're reading a script. So the trick to that is, in order to come across as authentic in a situation like this or in person where it's not an authentic situation, right? Humans are not one-to-many communicators. We're one-to-one communicators. And so when there's 1 of me and 10 of you, that is already a not normal situation. So the way to come across as normal or authentic or my true self in those situations is to exaggerate everything I do. This is known as, in the public speaking circles, as the authenticity paradox. But basically what it says is, in order for me to come across as authentic, I have to exaggerate everything I do. I've got to speak louder than I think I should. I've got to use more movements with my arms. I've got to be more expressive with my face. It's going to feel uncomfortable to me, but what's going to come across to you guys is a pretty normal version of me once it gets through that adrenaline filter and the nerves and all that. Don't confuse that with people being fake. It's not about being fake. It's not about them being anything but the best version of themselves, the same version that you would run into in the hallway, the same version that you would have a drink with at the bar, just that really engaged, personable, authentic version of themselves. And again, we talked about the video earlier. That's the best way to help people achieve that, is to let them see themselves the way the audience sees them. And typically when I'll video somebody doing a presentation, I'll let them watch it and I'll say, do you recognize that guy? And invariably they say, no, I have no idea who that guy is. My wife wouldn't recognize him. My kids wouldn't recognize him. My coworkers wouldn't recognize him. But they have no sense of that in the moment. So you got to kind of make them aware of it and then push them to exaggerate, push them to kind of go over the top with their voice, with their movements, all that stuff. That's a big part of coaching, is to push people outside their comfort zones. And what I tell my teams is, if you're doing this and you feel completely comfortable, it's not enough. You need to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And if you feel a little bit uncomfortable, you can have confidence that what's coming across is a really good version of you. That's the trick there. All right, we talked message, simple message, focused on the things your listener cares about, limiting the amount of technical or process-related explanation that you give, focusing more on the stories, the examples, the analogies to really connect, make it relevant, make it interesting. Talk about delivery, eye contact, vocal energy, by far the two most important things you can do. Eye contact virtually is with the camera lens. I think it's a good idea to put a little reminder up there to help you with that. Vocal energy virtually, it's tough. And so, like Chris pointed out, I'll tend to just stand up so that I can kind of tap into the same energy I would have if I was in the room. The specifics of the virtual stuff as far as framing the picture, as far as where the camera's focused, as far as the background, the lighting, we've touched on all that. Any other questions with that stuff? Otherwise, I'll dive into some Q&A. You guys good? Enzio, I liked your lake background better. Say again.
What about children in the interview? Children, family.
I don't like them. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I give you. So I have 2 young kids at home, and this comes up. So I have a 2-prong answer for that. Number one is let them know what's going on, right? So, I mean, I'm blessed to have my wife home, and I'm downstairs, and so when I'm on a call like this, like she knows, they know, don't come downstairs, right? But I think there's also a little bit of grace that we have to extend to each other. We're all in the same situation. We're all in an unfamiliar, uncomfortable working environment. We've all got kids, dogs. Hell, they're building a house next door. And at some points during the day, between concrete trucks backing up, or, hammers, or, saws or whatever, there's just noise that I can't do anything about. And so I think just extending a little bit of grace and not worrying about it too much. But the best defense to that is an offense, and make sure you're in a space that is not likely to get interrupted. You guys have probably seen those videos on YouTube of the guys on the BBC, and suddenly their kids come in the room. And I saw one guy, he responded pretty cool. He just kind of ushered the kid out. And I saw another guy do it, and he cussed his kid out up one side, down the other, and just came across like a real jerk on BBC. Whatever. Same with pets. We got dogs, right? Your dog's going to bark. There's nothing you can do about it. Just extend each other some grace. Don't stress it. What else? Let's talk Q&A. So only got about 5 minutes, but Q&A is probably the most important part of all this stuff. And the reason I say that is because we talked about the message, we talked about focusing on things that your client cares about. But the reality is when you get into the Q&A, that's when you get confirmation of what matters to them. If I ask you a question about something, that is something I care about. No questions, right? No doubt. And so being ready for Q&A, being able to knock Q&A out of the park, I think you can have a mediocre presentation, and if you crush the Q&A, you can win the job. I think conversely, you can have an excellent presentation with a lot of whiz-bang slides and whatever, and if you blow a few questions, you're not going to get the job. And I've got some horror stories I could share, but I won't, because some of them involve people on this call. The point is, you gotta put priority on the Q&A. And so what I do there is, as I'm getting teams ready, I'll have them come up with a list of all the questions that they think a client might ask. If you were the client listening to you talk about these points, what are some questions that would come to mind, right? And I want everybody to come up with 5, 6 questions. I will also challenge the team to come up with a list of 5 questions that they hope the client doesn't ask. Those gotcha type questions. So have you guys ever worked in this state before? And we haven't. Has your project manager and superintendent ever worked together before? And they haven't, right? So I want to come up with those 5 or 6 questions that we really, really hope they're not going to ask us, and I want to be ready to respond to those questions. So once we identify the questions, it's just really a matter of practicing. One thing I do is I encourage my teams to practice 2-sentence answers. So I'll ask a question of, let's say, Valerie. Probably the first time she's heard that question, she may give kind of a long, rambling response. That's fine. But now I'm going to ask you again, Valerie, and this time I want you to pare it down to no more than 2 sentences. The first sentence should be the direct answer to the question that I asked. The second sentence, if you need it, is where you can expand, clarify, provide an example, whatever. But if you get that answer out right away, there's not as much tendency to keep going, right? And it's kind of the same thing we talked about with the focused message. If I can answer your question in 1 or 2 sentences, it's kind of a drop the mic moment, that says I know my stuff. This isn't my first rodeo. But if it takes me a long time to come up with an answer and I kind of circle the airport but I never actually land the plane, you tend to lose a little bit of confidence in me and my level of expertise. So practice, come up with the questions, practice answering the questions. Keep your answers short. Two-sentence answer is ideal. It's not always practical, but it's kind of an ideal to aim for. And the only other thing I'll say about Q&A is don't drink alcohol or throw a cat. That's great advice. That's good advice for life. I don't know what that's referring to, but I'm going to Google that when we're done. The only thing about Q&A that I'm really kind of adamant about is this whole idea of piling on. So Kathleen, we talked about kind of the choreography that goes into having smooth transitions. And, you know, I know when Joe stops talking is when I start talking, and you know, we seem polished. We seem like we're a team, right? You can absolutely destroy that in Q&A when team members start piling on other team members. Now, here's the thing about that. I've watched this phenomenon for years. I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing untoward about it. Nobody's trying to outdo anybody else. Nobody's trying to make anybody else seem incompetent. It's more of a paternal or maternal instinct where, let's say, you know, Brittany answers a question and she gives a perfectly good answer, but I know a little something about that topic, and so I want to lean in and add a little bit more to her answer. Here's the problem, though. Whatever incremental value my additional answer can provide is more than offset by the sense that I don't trust Brittany. I don't think she's the expert that she really is. I don't think she's competent. And trust me, clients, owners, audiences, they see that. Especially when you're working with senior folks and more junior folks on the same team. It's always the senior folks that do this, by the way. And you know, you'll have a junior engineer or a intern architect or whatever answer a question, and they'll do a perfectly fine job. And then that principal will step in and say, well, let me tell you what Chris said and add a little bit to that. You just watch their body language. Their shoulders drop. You know, their expression goes blank. It's like the biggest defeatist kind of response. And I promise you, clients see that, owners see that. So I tell my teams, no piling on. They just can't do it. One, because of the impact it has on the sense of you as a team, but also because it's contagious. You guys have seen this. Once 4 people answer a question, now 4 or 5 people are going to answer every question. And I've destroyed that chance to really have a connection and a conversation, right? So just a hard and fast, no piling on rule. The exception or the workaround to that is if I'm answering a question, I can always invite somebody in. Maybe I get asked a question. I know a little bit something about that. I share my ideas, but I know Valerie is an expert in that. So I can always invite Valerie in. Valerie, that's been my experience, but I know you worked on a project where you guys ran into that a lot. Do you want to share your experience? That's fine. That's perfect all day long. Because what that says is I know my teammates, I trust them, I know where their strengths lie. And that's a really great way to solidify the team. So invite in all day long, but never step on uninvited. What else? What are the challenges? Thank you, Blair, for the link. I will look at that as soon as we hang up. Any other questions? Any other challenges? Any other ideas? I don't have all the answers. I'm learning this stuff as I go, just like you guys are.
What happens when you get to a question that you don't know the answer to? How do you react to
it? It happens, right? I mean, ideally, it doesn't happen too much. What I tell people is if you know your audience and you know your subject matter, which we do, right? You should be able to anticipate 85 to 90% of the questions you're going to get. And when I do really comprehensive Q&A prep with a team, it's pretty rare that a question comes up during the interview that they didn't anticipate. But if that happens, and if it is truly a question you don't know the answer to, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. But I'll throw in a caveat to that. I don't know, but I know someone who does. I don't know, but Valerie back at our office is an expert in that. As soon as we're done with this call, I'm gonna reach out to her and get you an answer, and I'll follow up by this afternoon. That's a perfect approach. There's nothing wrong with that. Clients don't expect you to have all the answers all the time. They would much rather you say, I don't know, than to bullshit them. But if you do that, what's the crucial piece of that? What's the thing I have to do? Follow up. That's it. Because it's kind of a test of my responsiveness, right? If I say to you, I don't know, I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to be open and honest and tell you I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to go find out. And then I follow up with you. You know you can trust me. You know you can trust me, and that's the main thing. But if I tell you I don't know, and then I'll follow up and I never do, I'm not responsive. You know, I'm not somebody you're going to want to work with. So What else? Anything else from you guys? Let's see, Mary Catherine, Kathleen, Jim, Chris, anybody?
How do you choose who answers?
Oh, so it's part of the practice, right? The way I do that real quickly, because I know we're about out of time, typically I'll designate what I call a quarterback. And in the construction world, that's like your project executive. In the design world, maybe your principal in charge. It's really whoever the client would see as the leader of the team. I want that person to serve as the quarterback. Typically, if a question is directed right to you, Mary Catherine, you answer it, right? Or let's say it's a question about interior design. I know my interior designer on the team is going to answer it. But if it's one of those questions that kind of lands in the middle and it's not really clear who it's to, or it's one of those generic questions like, why should we select your team, right? I want everybody to feel confident that that quarterback is going to take that question and they have a choice. They can either answer it themselves or they can delegate it. Doesn't matter. But what that avoids, Mary Catherine, is that awkward silence or that awkward kind of back and forth of figuring out, oh God, who's going to take that? Or even worse, 2 or 3 people stepping in and trying to answer it at the same time. So that's always very clearly, I always have a clearly designated quarterback for exactly that situation. What else? Anything? Well, listen, I know you guys have to jump off. I'm available. I am a full-time J.E. Dunn guy, but one of the beautiful things about my job is J.E. Dunn allows and actually encourages me to be an ambassador to the community and the industry. So, and especially since y'all are my peeps from Nashville, I'm more than happy to be a resource. My email is matt.frankel@jedunn.com, matt.frankel@jedunn.com. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to provide advice or guidance or whatever. And more than anything, just, you know, we're all in this together. I know that sounds so cliche. You hear it on every newscast, but we really are. So the stuff you guys are struggling with, every other marketer, every other business developer, every other professional out there is struggling with the same things. So it really is more of a level playing field than it may feel like. All right, guys, thank you so much, especially my Gresham folks and my SSR folks and all my good friends that I haven't seen in a while. Really enjoyed spending time with you. Thank you for calling in. See you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Matt.
Matt.